The auction yard was almost empty by the time Ethan McGraw raised his hand. A lonely rancher, he had stood in silence as cattle, horses, and tools were sold off to the highest bidders. But what he wasn't expecting, what nobody was expecting, was when a burlap sack was placed over a girl's head, and the auctioneer announced with a half smirk, starting at $5. The crowd chuckled. Some thought it was a cruel joke. Others just shook their heads and walked away. Nobody wanted to be part of it. Except Ethan. Something in his chest tugged at him. $5 wasn't much, but for him, it wasn't about money. It was about what he saw in her trembling hands, the way her shoulders hunched, as if she were carrying the weight of 1,000 storms. So Ethan raised his hand. "5," he said, his voice steady. The auctioneer slammed his gavel down. "Sold." The men around him laughed, muttering, "Poor fool rancher bought himself trouble for $5. Ethan didn't care. He led her gently to his wagon. When he slipped the sack off her head, he froze. She was young, with eyes as fierce as wildfire and just as broken. Her hair was messy, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but there was something else, something startling. She didn't beg, she didn't cower. She looked him dead in the eyes and whispered, "I'll work for you. I'll do anything. Just, don't send me back." Ethan's throat tightened. He wasn't a man who trusted easily. He'd been alone too long, ever since the war took his brothers and the drought took the rest of his family. The ranch had become more prison than home. But there was something about her, something raw, honest, desperate, that made him nod. "Then stay," he said softly. That night, while the stars burned quietly over the plains, Ethan gave her a warm meal and a blanket. She ate like she hadn't tasted food in days. Slowly, piece by piece, her story spilled out. She had been orphaned, sold off from one hand to another like she was nothing more than property. Every time she thought she'd found a place, someone betrayed her. Until tonight, when she was thrown into that cruel auction. Ethan listened. Not with pity, but with respect. He saw in her something he recognized in himself: loss, loneliness, and the quiet hunger for belonging. And that's when she offered something he never expected. "Teach me," she whispered. "Teach me how to work. Teach me how to take care of the land, the animals. I'll help you. You don't have to be alone anymore." Ethan blinked. He had thought she'd ask for shelter, food, or safety. Instead, she asked for responsibility. She offered companionship, not as a burden, but as someone willing to carry half the weight of the ranch with him. It broke something in him, and healed something else at the same time. Weeks turned into months. Side by side, they mended fences, cared for the cattle, planted crops. She laughed in the rain when the dry land finally saw water. He found himself smiling again, the sound of her joy echoing through the once empty ranch house. But the real test came one hot afternoon, when a bull broke through the fence. Ethan rushed to stop it, but his age and weariness caught up to him. Before he could be crushed, she leapt forward, fearless, quick, and drew the animal back with nothing but a rope and sheer will. When it was over, she turned to him, cheeks flushed, eyes blazing, and shouted, "I told you. I can stand beside you." For the first time in years, Ethan laughed. A real, deep laugh that filled the wide, lonely land. Months later, the ranch was no longer silent. There was warmth in the house again. Not romance. Not yet. Something deeper. Trust. Friendship. The kind of bond forged in sweat, soil, and survival. And one evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, she placed a hand on his arm and said, "You saved me that day. But you didn't just buy me. You gave me back my dignity. My life, and now, this is my home too." Ethan swallowed hard, looking at her with the same awe he had felt the day she pulled that sack off her head. "No," he said quietly, "you gave me something. You gave me back my reason to live." Far away, in another world of glass towers and polished floors, a billionaire woman named Catherine arrived home from a long business trip. Her heels clicked against the marble as she opened her door, only to stop in shock. Her son was in the garden, laughing, splashing in a water tube with the janitor she barely noticed most days. They were both soaked, covered in soap bubbles, and grinning ear to ear. At first, she bristled. This wasn't proper. But then she saw something she hadn't seen in years, her boy, truly happy. She realized, in that moment, that kindness doesn't come with wealth or titles. Sometimes it's $5 at an auction. Sometimes it's a janitor who treats your child like his own. And just like Ethan McGraw, she felt something shift inside her. Because the truth is, kindness doesn't just save the one receiving it. It saves the giver too. And so, what started with $5 became priceless. A lonely rancher found family. A broken girl found dignity. And a billionaire woman discovered that sometimes the richest moments in life come not from what we own, but from what we give. The auction yard was nearly empty, the wooden stage creaking under the weight of the last lots. Dust swirled in the hot summer air, and the crowd had already thinned. Cows, horses, and wagons had been sold. Tools, saddles, and crates had gone to the highest bidders. Ethan McGraw stood silently at the back, his weathered hat pulled low against the sun, hands rough and cracked from years of work on the ranch. He had come out of habit more than need. A lonely man, he spent his days in silence, mending fences, tending cattle, listening to the wind whistle across his empty land. Since the war had taken his brothers and drought had stripped the life out of his farm, Ethan's heart had grown as dry as the plains around him. But what happened next was something no one expected. A man shoved a figure forward onto the stage. A burlap sack covered her head. Her wrists were tied loosely, and her body shook under the weight of fear and humiliation. The auctioneer smirked and raised his gavel. $5. That's all I'm asking for this one, $5 to start. The crowd chuckled. A few men whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Some thought it was a cruel joke. Others muttered about how low the world had fallen. But not one person raised a hand. No one wanted trouble. Except Ethan. Something inside him, maybe instinct, maybe mercy, tightened in his chest. He saw the way her small hands trembled, the way her shoulders sagged as though life had already beaten her down. He spoke, low but steady. 5. The crowd snickered. Fool rancher, one man muttered. Another barked out a laugh. But before the girl could even flinch, the auctioneer slammed the gavel down. Sold, to McGraw, for $5. Ethan guided her away from the stairs. He didn't speak as he helped her onto his wagon, but his movements were gentle. When they were far from the yard, he reached up and untied the sack. And then, he froze. She was young, younger than he'd expected, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her hair tumbled in wild, tangled waves. But it was her eyes that caught him. Fierce, defiant, and yet, broken. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. She just met his gaze and whispered, "Please, don't send me back. I'll work for you. I'll do anything, just let me stay." Ethan's throat tightened. He had expected fear, maybe anger, maybe begging. Instead, he found something else, dignity. A spark of someone who had been through hell but refused to kneel. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. But she shook her head. "I do. You gave me a chance. Nobody else would." And that's when she said the words that would change everything. "Teach me. Teach me how to live, how to work, how to stand beside you. You don't have to be alone." In the days that followed, Ethan gave her food, a small room, and worked to keep her hands busy. At first, she struggled with simple tasks, milking cows, carrying water, fixing gates. But every time she failed, she tried again. And every time she tried, Ethan found himself silently rooting for her. For the first time in years, the ranch echoed with more than silence. Her laughter, awkward and uncertain at first, began to spill across the yard. She teased him when he lost his hat to the wind. She sang softly when she thought he wasn't listening. And slowly, Ethan's heart began to thaw. One evening, as the sky turned gold, she told him her story. She had been orphaned young, passed from one cruel hand to another. People treated her like property, like something to be bought and sold. Every place she went ended the same way, with betrayal, until that night at the auction. Ethan listened. Not with pity, but with respect. He saw himself in her words, loss, loneliness, the longing for a place to belong. And from that moment, their bond deepened. Weeks turned into months. Together, they repaired the broken ranch. They planted seeds where the soil had cracked. They nursed cattle back to health. When a storm rolled across the plains, they worked side by side, tying down everything that could blow away. The land began to change, and so did they. But the turning point came one hot afternoon when a bull broke through the fence. Ethan rushed to rope it, but his weary body betrayed him. He stumbled, falling hard. Before the animal could charge, she leapt forward. With nothing but a rope in her hands and sheer will in her heart, she turned the beast aside. Dust flew, hooves thundered, but she held her ground. When it was over, she stood, chest heaving, eyes blazing. "I told you," she said, voice shaking but proud. "I can stand beside you." Ethan looked at her, and laughed. A deep, booming laugh he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, the ranch wasn't just his anymore, it was theirs. Months later, the ranch house glowed with warmth. Not romance, at least not yet. Something deeper. Trust. Respect. A bond built not on ownership, but on choice. One evening, she placed her hand on his arm. "You saved me that day," she said softly. "But it wasn't just $5. You gave me back my dignity. My life. This is my home now." Ethan swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "No," he said quietly. "You gave me something. You gave me back my reason to live." Far away, in a different world of glass towers and wealth, another story unfolded. Catherine, a billionaire woman, returned home after weeks away. Her heels clicked on marble floors as she pushed open the door, tired from endless meetings. But then she stopped in her tracks. In her garden, her son was laughing. Really laughing. He was splashing in a water tube with the janitor, both of them covered in soap bubbles, their joy echoing across the yard. At first, Catherine frowned. It wasn't proper, it wasn't polished. But then she saw her son's smile. The kind of happiness money couldn't buy. And in that moment, she realized something Ethan McGraw had learned long before. True kindness doesn't come with wealth or titles. It doesn't come from power or pride. Sometimes, it's $5 at an auction. Sometimes, it's a janitor who treats your child like his own. But always, it's what saves us. And so, the lonely rancher who spent $5 found something priceless. A girl without a home found a family. A billionaire woman discovered that happiness doesn't live in mansions. It lives in moments of love and compassion. Because kindness doesn't just rescue the one receiving it, it saves the giver too.